Governor Walker took the stage with 9 other Republican candidates Thursday night in the first GOP primary debate in Cleveland. The governor didn't have any stumbles. Some reviews called his performance solid, but others said he disappeared at times, and he did have less airtime than all but 2 other candidates. WISN 12 political reporter Kent Wainscott covered the debate. He joins us now from Cleveland, Ohio. Kent, it's good to have you on the program this morning. Let's talk about what the governor's people were saying about his performance immediately after the debate.
Mike, I think they were very happy with what they saw on the stage, and you mentioned that some had suggested that he disappeared and that he didn't sort of steal the spotlight. Well, that was a very difficult thing to do given what was going on that stage with the fireworks between some of the candidates. But in terms of the Walker campaign, I think they were looking for a clean performance. They were looking for Walker to stay on message, which he certainly did. And again, this is a first debate. There are going to be many more of these between now and next spring. So this was something they just wanted to get solid out of the gate, get a good start, get a good momentum going, and move on to the next round.
Ken, how did Walker's people feel about the time he got on Thursday night? He did have less airtime than most candidates there, although we should point out he didn't use all of his allotted time on occasion. How did they feel about that?
You know, I think they were less concerned, frankly, about the airtime than they were about the message that was being delivered. And I think they went into this realizing that there was probably going to be some of the kind of interaction between the candidates, the attacks back and forth that we saw on the stage. They didn't want Walker to be a part of that, and instead turning a lot of the attack or the focus toward Hillary Clinton and the Democrats. And so he was able to do that throughout much of the night. That's what they were hoping for. They considered it a very, as I said, solid performance, and I think they were more concerned about that than they were the camera time that he got.
Give me a sense, Kent, of what they're looking at now. I mean, this is a big first test for the governor. A lot of people didn't know that much about him. Maybe they had heard of him. Maybe they'd had some familiarity with his battle with unions, but they still didn't know a lot about him. Now what does the Walker campaign do after clearing this first hurdle?
Well, they're already looking ahead. They've got debate prep planned throughout the month of August and into September prior to the next round of debates. But I think the key for them is to see how the public reacts to what they heard in this first debate. A number of the other candidates, I think, felt going in that they had to make some sort of splash, that they had to grab the spotlight. That wasn't the case for Walker. His campaign has been strong. He's been running well in the polls, and so he felt as though he was in a very comfortable position, and as long as he could maintain that momentum, that sort of even keel, they're on their own pace, and that's what they'd like to continue. If that changes, if the polls indicate that there's some shift or that Walker slips in the numbers after this first debate, well, then maybe they'll readjust and change their strategy. But that's not their plan. They want to stay on message, stay on their talking points, and continue at their own pace.
All right, Kent Wainscott joining us from Cleveland, Ohio. We appreciate your time. Thanks a lot for being with us, Kent. Our editorial partner, WizPolitics.com, has you covered with a roundup of national stories about the Walker campaign. You'll find that on the Walker Watch blog at WizPolitics.com. Coming up next on Front, Wisconsin, are we still a battleground state?